Welcome to Quantum Business Insights, emerging perspectives on people, process, and profits. Your host is Olivia Parr-Rud. In today's fast-paced, high-tech global economy, the business landscape is constantly evolving. To be successful, companies must continually adapt as well as identify and exploit new opportunities. Now, here is the host of Quantum Business Insights, Olivia Parr-Rud.
Hi, and welcome to Quantum Business Insights. I'm your host, Olivia Parr-Rud. Each week on Quantum Business Insights, I explore the changing nature of business with thought leaders from around the world. And my hope is that through dialogue and inquiry, we'll discover new approaches and perspectives that can help us all be more successful in our business. The topic of today's show is our evolving business landscape. To explore this topic with me is Stephen McHugh, an extremely talented business visionary. But before I formally introduce Stephen, I'd like to take a few minutes to share some of the ideas behind the creation of this show and what inspired me to take this path. If you're familiar with my work, then you know that I've been working in data mining and business intelligence for over 20 years. That has been my main focus, but I've always had this passion for human development and personal growth. I even thought about studying psychology at one time, but I had a young family and I needed to be practical, so I decided to take advantage of my math skills and get a degree in statistics. I started my career as a statistician in the early 90s building predictive models for a small, aggressive credit card bank. It was really exciting, and it was really stressful. The whole industry was booming. In the first 6 years, I worked for 4 different financial institutions, and I experienced and witnessed several mergers and acquisitions. In each case, I noticed that during the height of the chaos, morale just collapsed. The business suffered. And at that time, there was a huge demand for people with credit card experience. So at the first sign of uncertainty, some of the best talent just took off. And those who stayed were often left in the dark, and everything went downhill. And I saw this pattern over and over. After years of that, I realized I didn't want to be working for a large corporation anymore, so I went into consulting. And around the same time, I started speaking at data conferences. And most of the time, I talked about data mining, but every once in a while, I'd slip in a topic like the importance of good communication, or how to manage change, or how to be more creative. And these topics were hugely popular, but the problem was people didn't know how to take them back and really integrate them into their workplace. So I kind of let that go, and in the early 2000s, I had what I would call an aha experience. I saw the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? I know it sounds crazy, but it was a really interesting movie because it suggested a different way of looking at the world through a new science, and it seemed to explain some of what I was experiencing. And it resonated with my personal growth experience. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I learned about systems theory and complex adaptive systems. And they tell us that if we allow structure to emerge from chaos, it'll be more adaptable and more resilient. And this fascinated me. But I kept wondering, how can I apply it to my work? And then a few years later, I read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and I had an insight. As Friedman puts it, the world is going digital, virtual, and global. And I started to see where the increased use of data and technology brought many benefits, but it also introduced a level of complexity and put us in a state of almost constant change, not to mention the global marketplace. Now, as a data miner, I love when I can identify patterns. So the science model started to explain what I was experiencing. And if I was able to tolerate some uncertainty and allow order to emerge, we could all thrive in this new digital, virtual, global economy. So as I thought about this, I realized something. It would only work if we engage and empower the people within the organization. For example, things are changing too quickly for top management to make all the decisions. By the time a question goes up the chain of command and back down, the opportunity is often lost. So I started to see the big picture and how my 2 areas of interest, data mining and human development, were actually connected and coming together, and that they had an effect on each other. And I experienced my own version of order emerging out of chaos. So starting today, I want to invite you to join me each week as I engage in deep conversations with thought leaders that have developed or worked with these theories. And as I want to draw attention to those systems and processes that take advantage of our most valuable asset, our human capital. So for my first show, I'm delighted to have as my guest Stephen McHugh. He has a broad background that bridges many aspects of business that I feel are important for success today. Let me tell you a little bit about Stephen. He's a business coach and advisor, a psychotherapist and mentor, a master trainer, facilitator, and a change management consultant. He is currently CIO of Idea Champions and CEO of Unison Business Development, a corporate strategic planning consultancy with clients representing the high-tech, banking, insurance, manufacturing, healthcare, and telecommunications industries. Stephen, welcome to Quantum Business Insights.
Hi, Olivia. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. So to get started, let me ask you, when comparing companies today with those, say, 20, 30 years ago, one of the big changes I've seen is that they seem to be more customer-focused. They're going after this single view of the customer. What has been your experience when helping companies make this change?
It's what I've seen is a very big cultural shift to actually put the customer at the center of the business and to be able to then bring in the cultural shift, the systems, and the processes to actually make that real. And in many instances, it's taken more than 1 or 2 attempts to make that right over 4, 5, 7 years to actually get that customer-centric model and make it real.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge? What are the barriers that make it take so long and make it so difficult?
Well, the one of the obvious ones is silos, and the fact that prior to actually investing in the kinds of IT, software, and hardware necessary, and the training necessary to have an actual CRM, you've got customers stuck in every sort of spreadsheet all around the country, and no integration around the data for the customer, and no really thought or concern for the impact on the customer, with lots and lots of people having different vectors to the customer.
Oh, so boy, yeah.
That is, at the process level, it's a problem, let alone at the people level that you were describing that's so important.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was familiar with a bank that did some research to see how many separate databases they had. Talk about silos. And there were over 2,000 separate databases. Some were just spreadsheets on people's computer, but everybody was using them. So what is one of the challenges of just the long-term view? Seems like with short-term accountability of companies, does that create challenges?
Well, when you start to actually get your people working together around a customer-centric model or even around an innovation model, it is just a big culture change. People actually have to work together differently. Collaboration, how you handle data, who owns what around the customer or around the product or service. These kinds of things are a big, big shift over the past 10 to 20 years with the way people have to work together to actually get the job done and compete in the global market.
So it sounds like it would be really important for the leaders to agree to this, and maybe so. How important is the role of leadership in this kind of a change?
Oh, it's paramount. It's huge. At some point, about 25 years ago, I completely gave up trying to do bottom-up change. It was way too frustrating, and really, part of the issue here is what's the impetus to change at all in a business or an organization?
Yeah.
And you've got, there are two of them. The main one is fear. That's the one where suddenly somebody wakes up and goes, oh, my goodness, the competition is breathing down our neck, and we're still doing what we've been doing for a long time. You know, as one CEO client of mine put it, the threat of hanging sharpens the mind. And I thought, ooh, but yeah, there's that. When it's obvious and the threat is imminent, you can usually get senior management to agree on it, and then align the employees who mean everything to the change, because they're the ones who actually implement.
Right. So what are some of the other impetuses for change then?
Well, I like to say if necessity is the mother of invention, inspiration is the father of invention.
Ah.
So while it's very obvious when the threat of hanging is looming, when the trends that are drivers take time to develop, by the time everyone's red flags go up, it can be too late to avoid the big and nasty shifts in the market share and the stock price and so on. And there are a number of examples of that, which is to say, okay, who's actually watching the competition? And usually there's some people going, I see this, they're raising the red flag, and nobody's listening. Oh, we're fine. We've always done it this way. And so it's this less obvious trend watching that actually can be an inspiration to change before the absolute necessity hits you in the head with a 2x4.
So do you have any examples of companies that kind of missed the boat because they ignored those warnings?
Sure. You may have seen these some years ago, 7-Eleven, the corner convenience market that's everywhere, then woke up one day, the senior management, to find that convenience stores were springing up beside every corner gas station. Now you could get gas and also go in and get a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread. And this just spread so quickly, and they were, the 7-Eleven leadership were, by their own admission, were asleep at the wheel, having been lulled by years of having many thousands of stores, but no structure around watching the marketplace and the competition, and believing that they were just going to be the leader forever. That kind of situation happens again and again as businesses mature and people get stayed in their ways and decide, well, change is too much trouble.
Yeah, it can be really scary, I think, for some people, especially if it's been going along really well for years and years, then they get comfortable. And I think one of the biggest impediments to change is that people fear it. They don't want to get outside of their comfort zone. They like things to be predictable and expected. And so do you have any examples of companies that perhaps changed as a result of inspiration?
Well, sure. And I think that it is inspiring that actually a management team can take that visionary leadership role and direction. For me, I was working with a chlorine manufacturer, and you're looking at a group of people. They had, 4 or 5 plants all around the United States, and having actually staff there, the average tenure was over 20 years with the people who were on the plant floor. So that's not much change going on there. And they realized that they had an opportunity to become the low-cost supplier at the bottom of the next turn of the chlorine cycle.
Wow, can you just hold that?
When they were on top, they were getting ready to plan for the bottom of the cycle. It's not just coasting. Yeah, so working with a group of visionary leaders who were at the top of their business cycle in what's basically a commodity, so it has long 7-10 year cycles, So while here they are making the most money, actually inspiring their people to do the change so that they could be the low-cost leader at the bottom of the next downturn. This is rare, and also it was really powerful because they knew the only way to do that was to automate. But they were in a position where there weren't any computers on the floor in the plants. No one had any skills. And so we were visioning this and brainstorming this, and the idea came up from the leaders to give every employee's family a computer and a phone line and classes.
Wow!
Such that then they put everybody's pay stub online and stopped doing paper pay stubs and did direct deposit. So this is change right from an HR point of view, training, but also what happened, of course, is that the kids and many of the spouses start using the machine, and then they're going to classes, and the workers are going, okay, now I'm going to learn this thing. And they did.
Very smart.
And they went in very few years from nothing, literally, in terms of a corporate capacity around automation to full SAP automation and plant controls.
Wow.
And succeeded in their goal to be the low-cost provider at the bottom of the next downturn. Unions decertified because they started getting people into sharing the profits. I mean, it was very, very visionary and conscious and worked, and they are now the premier producer.
Wow.
So the secondary piece of this, of course, is that the people who were, the high potential employees who came on during this time, that we involved them in leadership training and also in leadership responsibility for implementing these visionary ideas, and now they're running the company 15 years later.
That's brilliant.
So
wow.
It sets up this visionary piece around saying, well, what are we inspired to do, and how can we bring that inspiration to everyone in the company? Sets up a very long-term success cycle.
Yeah, so when you approached the leaders, were they all pretty much open to this, or were there some that struggled?
There were some, and there usually are. You get a senior management team of 12, 14 people. Most of them are men, usually. And, my rule is that the CEO, the CFO, and the HR person have to be 100% on board. And everybody else, 80% of everybody else has to be 80% or better on board. Otherwise, don't begin a change effort. Otherwise, it'll be undermined and fail.
Wow. So have you started processes with companies where they were not all on board and then it did fail?
I actually started once and didn't get very far with an energy production company that shall remain nameless. And that, I was actually brought in through the strategic planning department, which was new because this very large electricity manufacturer had just done a merger and brought this guy in, and he went from being the CFO of one company to being the head of strategic planning, which is, no P&L, kind of lower on the totem pole. And I had this very large long-term contract, and we could not get an appointment with the CEO.
Wow.
No matter what we did, and we couldn't get people to meet. And he came to me, this guy who was the head of the strategic planning. He said, "What should I do?" And I said, "If I were you, I would take my golden parachute and jump out of the plane. Really, you're not getting any traction here." And I left on a Friday. I came back on a Monday, and he was gone.
Wow.
And my very large contract disappeared.
Oh, my.
But that is how it has to go that way.
Right.
You don't start unless you're committed to finish because it's just too depressing, demoralizing, too expensive to actually start a change effort that you're not committed to. It always works if you work the process, if you involve the people.
Right.
If you don't or won't, don't start.
Yeah. Well, so I also think about how a lot of the traditional companies have a lot harder time with change versus, say, the new technology companies that sort of grow up with people that are already used to the technology and used to collaborating and used to fast-paced change. Do you see that as just a real contrast, which is maybe explains why the technology companies can grow and profit so much faster than, say, old insurance companies or manufacturing companies and things like that? Is that a fair statement?
I believe so, and it's in lots of industries. Not just in the high tech ones. I think that the one example of this is that during the divestiture of AT&T, at Idea Champions, we were the premier new product services brainstorming consultants, and we were working with groups trying to, figure out how to help AT&T go from a monopoly to a competitor, right? And
wow.
So that's huge. And they had, long distance was the primary revenue generator, and they had actually, it structured it into 3 silos, run by 3 men who were constantly feuding and vying for more power and trying to get bigger budgets and usual politics. And, we just, no matter how many new long-distance plans were brainstormed and painstakingly developed into a plan, only one ever made it through the convoluted gauntlet of decision-making that they had. And then that was poorly implemented. Meanwhile, several managers left and established MCI Family and Friends, which you may remember was a very unique long-distance plan. MCI was a new competitor in the field, and it took at least over 25 to 30% of the market share from AT&T away in a very short time.
Wow. And I think they even subcontracted the AT&T lines or something, right? Like they could just, all they had to do was set up the business.
Because of the change in the laws. But they took advantage of this stodgy, calcified structure and this lack of agility that, really AT&T at the time was really stuck with. And those people knew that if they created a plan that spanned all 3 silos, those 3 people would never be able to agree on how to come after and change to come after the market share they were losing, and they were right.
Wow.
So this is where I think your hypothesis that it is the people and the leadership that actually make or break the evolution of a company so that it doesn't just mature, calcify, and die.
Right. We were talking a little bit about the importance of leadership and getting the teams involved, and you brought up the concept of visionary leadership. Can you expand on that a little bit and maybe give some examples of where you've seen that in practice?
Sure. Love to do that. One great example was when Zurich American Insurance acquired home insurance some years ago. And there was, because it wasn't exactly a friendly merger, there was no shared vision to bring together 2 really very different styles of management. Zurich is really, think Swiss watchmakers, right?
Right.
Very precise and stepwise. And the home insurance team, the leadership team, think Wild West gunslingers. They really kind of rock and rolled with their style. And they naturally had a very hard time coming together after the merger. So they called us in for vision mapping and strategic planning. And we went through this visionary leadership process, got the senior team together. We had finally agreed on what was then a 5-year vision of success, in which all the, well, I'll say most, certainly 80% or more of the leadership team was on board. Nonetheless, everybody had been through the conversation of what it was going to take, agreed on where they were and how they were going to get to that vision. We mapped it out on a 12-foot-long piece of paper. Wow. And then, began a long-term implementation plan. But this kind of process, this vision mapping, really is successful in bringing leadership teams together with a deep understanding and a deep commitment to the changes they want to make. And they know the reasons why, and then it's up to them to roll it out. We got in front of every department, all the people in the company, and said, here's where we are, here are the issues, here's where we need to be going, are you on board? And that alignment and enrollment process really got people excited.
Wow, that's great.
If you're going to involve people in a change effort, it takes more energy than just going to work. They essentially become volunteers, even though they're paid, because they're volunteering to put extra time and energy into the initiatives that the change requires above and beyond their daily work.
Right. It sounds like it almost calls for some passion. Right?
Very much so. That extra energy is the gas that powers the engine of change.
Interesting. So, in that example, did all of the managers seem to be able to work together? Did some of them end up taking other jobs? How did that work out?
Within 2 to 3 years, one retired. Well, that was good. A couple of others left, and some others who were sitting, really high potential employees stepped up to the table and became leaders themselves.
Wow.
So it really set up this longer term engine for success. And there was a whole new style of working together. So, for instance, the CEO said, we're all going to actually now be on the same floor, regardless of the floor where your people are.
So it sort of flattens the organization in a way.
Yeah, everyone had to actually state what their commitment was, and of course there's metrics around that, but the emotional energy that it took to say, we're closing the executive dining room, and we're going to remodel a floor of the building, and the senior team, we're going to actually work beside each other so we can learn to talk about things and not just be sending emails.
That's
it was a very
fascinating.
Powerful message, and the team worked together exceptionally well year after year, bringing in and essentially absorbing other companies, making them more and more efficient at that, and they got really good at mergers and acquisitions.
Wow. So, that would give them a real competitive advantage, because one of the things that I've noticed a lot of companies are doing is things are so specialized today that one company can't do it all anymore. There were a couple big technology companies that wanted to just try to do everything and eliminate the competition, and now they're getting much better at buying companies and integrating them. But it sounds like this kind of approach would be the only way that it could really work long term, unless they just get rid of all the people and keep the assets of the company and start from scratch with the people. But
and quite often that doesn't work. Doesn't work either. Mergers are like marriages; they only work out half the time. And that's terrible. When you think about it, that's a terrible destruction of value. Just awful.
Yeah, and when I was writing my book, Business Intelligence Success Factors, I found this research that said that the main reason mergers don't work is because of poor communication. And then there was a Gartner study that said 70 to 80% of business intelligence projects fail due to poor communication. So just getting people to talk to each other. In fact, I visited my old high school in July. I went back to my reunion, and we did a tour, and I was talking to the principal, and he had such a forward way of thinking that I want to get him as a guest on my show. He said that they don't let the kids have any technology because they want them to actually communicate with each other, and they get to sit together at lunch and talk, and they can't be on their phones or anything. They're not allowed to have any of that stuff. And they said it's reduced the bullying, and there's a lot better harmony, and the kids really seem happy and like each other. So if we can start young and get kids talking to each other, that's a real benefit. And maybe some of that, the technology I was saying earlier about the technology companies having usually younger employees that are more used to this, I'd be curious to know how they deal with that, because they definitely have the technology, but they must be set up somehow to be good at communicating. Do you have any insights around that?
Well, what we see at Idea Champions is that these companies are, from the get-go, they're establishing what we call a culture of innovation.
Ah.
And this has many aspects to it. Communication, of course, is one of them, but particular types of communication and invention and having processes in place. And certainly a lot of them we talked to are doing like annual competitions. 48 or 72-hour competitions. Some go through the night, some don't. And small teams, 2 or 3 people get together and try to invent, a new algorithm or a new marketable service for their software company. And so these kinds of things might happen every Friday, and then once or twice a year, and then there are awards, and also some of these things become products. I mean, certainly Google does this, and I know others. And it's this culture of innovation that I think is the shift that you're talking about between the feeling tone in these young entrepreneurial software and technology companies and sort of the big behemoths that have been around a long time and are having difficulty reinventing themselves.
Well, that totally makes sense, because the technology companies are sort of new inventions just in the last, say, 15 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the old companies really didn't have to worry about innovation that much because they weren't in this kind of global, fast-changing economy. So I want to, maybe after the break, get more into innovation. I just wanted to ask you about, you're familiar with Toyota and one of the things that they did where they really were very competitive with the U.S. car market because they distributed power. You familiar with that model where they created small teams?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, of course, they had a head start actually using Deming's quality methodology way before American manufacturers thought it was useful. So they had begun actually teaching everyone how to watch for ways to make improvements. I mean, you're talking about a company that makes incredibly reliable cars. I have one. And they continually knock off 2% of the costs year after year.
Wow.
That's sustainable innovation. That's what works so well, and that's what we can talk about it after the break, but Jim Collins, in his new book, Great by Choice, another Boulder guy, his discovery after incredibly in-depth research was it wasn't the most innovative companies that were what he calls 10X companies that were incredibly profitable and had great stock returns. For him, it was the discipline to make innovation a cultural strength that made the difference, and Toyota has done that, and they have stuck to that for the last more than 20 years. And they've made innovation repeatable and scalable and sustainable. And this is our experience at Idea Champions. This is the challenge, really, of creating a culture of innovation.
Well, and I know one of the things Toyota did was they created small teams where those teams could make decisions, correct? That they were empowered to make small changes and test things and make mistakes. And that's something that I think is a big challenge for companies that are trying to be innovative, is sometimes they can't tolerate mistakes. So we're going to take a break now, but when we come back, I'd really like to expand on this idea of innovation, because I think really this is the big challenge, that all the linear processes can be automated or outsourced. And if companies aren't innovating, they're not going to be successful over the long term. So we'll be right back.
Now, back to Quantum Business Insights.
Hi, welcome back, and I'm here with my guest, Stephen McHugh, CIO of Idea Champions and CEO of Unison Business Consulting. And before the break, we were talking about innovation and how it really is this thing that many companies need to pursue, because everything linear is being just outsourced or automated. So, Stephen, tell me a little bit more about your experience with companies that are doing this well, and what are some of the challenges to being truly innovative?
So I was, before the break, we were talking about the Jim Collins' research showing that the most successful companies were not necessarily the most innovative in terms of new products or services every year, but they were the most methodical innovators. So, most businesses are happy to be methodical for their bread and butter business. Systems and, working on processes and process improvement. And they sort of leave innovation as a happy accident. Instead of actually applying that same sort of step-by-step or methods to actually support innovation culturally. So you can get companies like, IBM, when they were developing the first PC, who set up a skunk works off-site and then had really a great executive sponsor who protected them until they could actually have their product done and operating and out of the mainstream of the day-to-day business that would have killed them as a project, could it have gotten its hands around the neck of that team.
So it sounds like financial issues are a big constraint to innovation, that a company really needs to be able to put money aside and maybe not see any return for a while. Is that true? Well,
for companies that don't actually have an innovation budget, innovation is really a joke, in my estimation. If there's, so for instance, it's to be able to say to people who are already working 50 to 55, 60 hours a week on the bread and butter business, to say to them, we have this, new idea and it's going to take another 15 hours a week work on it, the likelihood that that idea will ever be commercialized is very low.
Well, that makes sense. I also know that companies that are very innovative they have a higher tolerance for mistakes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we think of 3M, very innovative company. Even though, they came, in a way, they weren't in the early days. To them, people can work 20% of their time, which is one day a week, which is a lot, on an innovative idea, and they expect out of 100 of those, 97 won't amount to anything. 3 will go into commercialization. Out of the 3, 1 will lose money, 1 will break even, and the other 1 will be a runaway success.
And that'll pay for everything, I guess,
and that
right?
pays for everything. Plus, you have established this method and a really methodological approach to innovation. You'd think, how can you have methods to creativity? Well, creativity requires time and space and a kind of, you may, as a writer, you're unlikely to probably write really well sitting in Grand Central Station.
That's an understatement.
Or, doing your daily work and answering phones. And, over the years at Idea Champions, we've asked people, where do you get your best ideas? And no one has ever said, at my desk.
Yeah.
Well,
actually, I remember...
People. What's wrong with that?
I remember reading about 3M. I'm pretty sure that was the company where they created a room that had this big window that looked out over water and flowers, and they had big, comfortable chairs and headphones with music, and they told their engineers that they should go and sit in that lounge for at least 30 minutes a day. And the whole reason was to, I guess, wake up their right brain, right? Get them to thinking innovatively.
It really, things like that are really supportive. Then you were talking about finances. I mean, so what does it take for a senior team to actually say, we're going to put this much money away towards the development of new products and services this year, some of which may not pay back for 2 or 3 years?
Wow.
When you've got monthly and quarterly numbers you have to hit.
Right. Wow.
And I think this is a built-in problem. It's like, Bell Labs, which was an AT&T company way back when, invented the transistor. That has entirely changed our lives.
Yeah.
And who's doing that now? Well, it's the companies that have this culture of innovation and have the guts, really, to put their money where their mouth is. But also, you have to change all of your people processes, too.
Oh, so what does that look like?
Well, I was telling you about the chlor-alkali company, and one of the prime people who made these visionary changes happen was the HR guy.
Wow.
And it was because when you start putting people on inventive projects that are going to go through a commercialization assessment, some of these projects, it starts out with a simple 1-inch deep idea, a simple plan, and then you would put some money and time and people at it, and they go and they work on it, and then it becomes a 1-foot deep plan, and then if you're going to actually grow something, it's got to actually get funding. It's just like a startup company within the company. These are intrapreneurs. And the HR people have to backfill the roles of the people who are on the new entrepreneurial projects. And they have to find new compensation systems. They have to give people completely different rules, essentially, to support the innovation. And that's why I'm saying if the HR people have got to be 100% on board, because it requires a lot of innovation from them, and they need to be at the table with the senior team as a fully bona fide decision maker who, otherwise you can't actually provide the structure and support of the people whose projects will be one of those 3 that dies. Or the one of the 97 where you put 3 months into something and then it doesn't fly, and then can you go back to your job?
Right. Wow. Yeah, it reminds me too, just when you were saying about a separate unit inside, that very first credit card bank that I worked for had a test center, and they did every single thing that the big bank did, from offers to fulfillment, and they could do it really quickly and then get rid of the bad ideas. But that was definitely a big expense that they were willing to make, and one of the reasons they were so profitable. So that's interesting. Do you know of any companies that are doing that now?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of them who are waking up to innovation because, as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, we're now in a global digital economy. And also, consumer sentiment is changing, and people want more natural products and things like that. And so it's this sort of slow creation of inspiration to change, and then creating a simple process for innovation, not too complex, but enough structure that there are roles and processes around it, and then building this culture of innovation in a variety of ways, from the kind of contests to setting up special shops or special teams. And then it's up to the senior leadership to redesign the organizational structures and the way work is done, and the processes, and the systems that can support innovation, especially in human resources.
Well, let me just say we have about a little bit over a minute left, so if you want to just share a little bit about what you do at Idea Champions, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, we really are in support of this, what we call the innovation journey.
We have about 30 seconds.
It's it's unique to each company, but it has these same kind of steps and support around creating a culture of innovation, and that's the key piece in the long run to make innovation sustainable.
Oh, thank you. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. Stephen, thank you so much for being my guest today. I hope you will come back.
I will, and thanks so much for hosting me.
You're welcome. So next week, we're going to explore complexity with Denise Easton of The Complexity Space. Be sure to check my host page on Voice America for full details. I'm your host, Olivia Parr-Rud. Thank you for tuning into Quantum Business Insights, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to Quantum Business Insights.